Hi guys, my name is Tanishk Parihar and I will be giving a presentation on my project which is based on soccer database and it will be focusing mainly on the transfer market in the soccer world. Now we will talk about the major functions of the database, like what data to collect, who can input this data, who can query this data, and finally what kind of major question our database will help us to solve. So, first we will start by what kind of data to collect for this database. We will be collecting data on general information about the player, like its age, country, playing position, which club does he play for, etc. Then, about its attribute and injury record, which can play an important role in deciding the player's market value. Also, we will collect data about the clubs, which are an important component of transfer market. Then, data about the managers and the leagues which are related to the clubs. We will also have record of match highlights of a player's performance which will help the clubs and the manager in at least doing the initial scouting of the player. Finally, every bid, that is transfer offer made by the club for a player, will be recorded no matter if it was accepted or not. Next, we talk about the most important thing, that is who can input the data. This is important because we don't want any bias in our data. So we assign this task to a non-profit international organization, something like FIFA. An international governing body like this will help to collect data from around the world. Now we move on to the next question of who can access and query this data. This can be done by the league, the managers, the clubs, and the players. Leagues can use this data to get information about the managers, clubs, and players in their particular league. Next, the manager and club can use this data to perform initial scouting on players and then use it to place transfer bids. Also, the players can use this data to get some kind of feedback about their performances. Now we move on to some of the major data questions that our database will help us to answer. First is the database can help clubs to look for players that are available according to their requirements. A requirement could be that the club is looking for a player below the age of 30 or if the player belongs to a particular league or not. We can also get information about the spending of the clubs in the transfer market. Also, the clubs can use it to find if the player is transfer listed or is injured. This is important because a market value can be adversely affected by an injury or if it is transfer listed by the club. Finally, we can look for players according to the position and sort it based on some attributes like the total number of goals scored or pace, stamina, etc. This is an entity relationship diagram of the database system created in Visio. In total, there are 11 entities such as player, manager, league, a league match, etc. Earlier, there were around 3 many-to-many relationships. To break to break this down, we created associative entities such as transfer bid, match record, and match recordings. Out of which, one associative entity, that is the match record, has a primary key as a combination of the two primary keys from the parent entity. Here is a similar diagram created in Access with all the 11 entities, including the 3 associative entities. All the type of relationships such as one-to-one, many-to-many, and one-to-many have been shown here. This is the same entity relation diagram what we saw in the last two slides, but this one is created in SQL. Next, we talk about the forms that we can use to add, modify, and view the data that we have entered. Forms provide us a very convenient way to do this. I've created 7 forms that enable us to modify the data in our 11 tables. In the next slides, we will go through all the 7 forms. Here is a form which helps us to view and add information about players. So you can see the form contains general information about the player such as the ID, playing position, age, club ID, etc. It also contains the information about the attributes and the injury record of the players. This particular form will help us to directly modify data of three tables that are the player table, the player attributes, and the injury record table. Our next form will help us to view and modify data of a club. Here we can notice that in the second row, we have created a combo box which will give us a list of league names from the league table. The combo box will help us to verify the integrity of our foreign key in the club table, as it will contain only those league names which are already added in the league table. Moving on to our next form. This form contains the details of the league, such as the league name, the country, the number of clubs, the total matches played in a league in a particular season. This is our fourth form, which will help us to modify or view the details of the manager, such as the manager ID, the manager name, or in the manager country. Our next form will help us to modify or view the details of a transfer bid placed by a club on a player. The form contains the club ID and the name of the club placing the bid, the player ID and the name on which the bid was placed, and also the value of the bid. It also contains if the bid was approved or not. Next we have is a form containing the details of a match such as the time, date and the result of the match. This form contains a subform which shows us the details of the clubs who played that particular match. Also, it shows us who was the home team and the result linked to the particular team. The last form that we have created here is by using three tables that are player, league match and match recording table. This form gives us the detail of the recording of a player's performance in a particular match. One thing we can notice here that to keep the integrity of the foreign key relationship, the player ID and match ID have been displayed more than once. But while adding records, we only need to enter the ID once because Access will autofill the other spaces using the foreign key relationship. Earlier we talked about some of the major data questions that our database system will help us to answer. In the next three slides, we will be going through the reports generated when we query these questions. Here we can see that a report is generated which is a result of a query by a club who is looking for a player in the left wing position having a market value less than 100,000. This is the second report which gives us the list of players who are currently injured. Here we can see that the report contains the player ID, the player name, the type of injury that the player is currently suffering from, and the number of past injuries of the currently injured player. Now we move on to the final report. In this report, we list all the clubs who have purchased players during the transfer season. In the last column, we can find the total amount of money spent by these clubs in the transfer market. This column was generated using an aggregate function. The aggregate function groups the transfers by the club ID and then it sums all the transfer amount for each club. The following trigger updates a player's club and resets the transfer flag to 0 when a transfer bid is approved. This trigger uses a if statement. This means that the information is only updated when a transfer is approved. If a transfer is not approved, we will see no change in the player's information. To demonstrate both the situations, we will insert a transfer bid which is approved and one which is not. This is a table of players before we insert our new values into the transfer bid table. In the next two slides, we will place an approved bid on player with player ID 10 and a rejected bid on on the player with player ID 4. Here we can see that a bid was placed by the club with club ID 1 on a player with a player ID 10. This bid was approved. So now we can see that the information of the player has been updated. The club ID has been changed to 1 and the transfer flag has been reset to 0. Here we can see that a failed transfer bid was placed on the player with player ID 4. As this transfer was rejected, we can see there is no change in the details of the player. From this table, we can see that the two bids got successfully added to our transfer bid table. One more thing that we can verify is that the if statement in our trigger is working properly, because it does not update information when a rejected bid is inserted into the transfer table.